criticized me for giving Brahmin and sannyas initiation and installing deities in the West and allowing women to stay in the temples. But for all that, I'm expanding Krishna consciousness, and for all their strictness, they are doing nothing. And if I discriminate, then I will again be one alone as I was in Vrindavan and again become a mouse. Srila Prabhupada ki. And this is the difference from one who's actually on the spiritual platform. He's not discriminating between who is fit and who is not fit. He's not making distinctions on the bodily platform. He's engaging everybody as a spirit soul, equal on the spiritual platform. Yeah, he was saying that if I'll just read it. If I discriminate, then again I will be alone like I was in Vrindavan and again become a mouse. Prabhupada said he would become a mouse. If he discriminates and places so many restrictions, traditionally there would be so many restrictions, none of us would be devotees for a start. And then Prabhupada would be alone in Vrindavan and nothing would have happened in the West. But because he didn't make these discriminations, then even though he had trouble with his disciples, or his disciples had trouble maintaining their vows, then he was still trying to create a platform for them where they could pick themselves up again and carry on. It shows a testament to the close relationship that the spiritual master has with the Lord, is that even if a disciple is in a fallen condition, if he takes shelter in the spiritual master and he gives some place to do some service, then he's still under spiritual master's protection, which means he still is eligible for Krishna's blessings. But he says if they go away, then what can he do? What's that?
Use the wrong verse.
Okay, which one is it?
Starting from this one and going up to this one.
Oh, that's right.
42.
We're all good anyway. Okay. So starting on 138. Okay, so I'll just go through these myself till we get to 142. Svasukha nibrita chetas tad dushtanya bhavo pyajita ruchira lila krishna sarastadiyam vyatanuta kripaya yas tatvadipam purano tam akila vrijina grinam vyasa sunam natospi. Translation. Let me offer my respectful, do the invocation first. Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Reading from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, chapter 17, entitled The Lord Goes to Vrindavan, start on text 138. Let me offer my respectful obeisances unto my spiritual master, the son of Vyasadeva, Shukadev Goswami, it is he who defeats all inauspicious things within this universe. Although in the beginning he was absorbed in the happiness of Brahman realization and was living in a secluded place, giving up all other types of consciousness, he became attracted by the most melodious pastimes of Lord Sri Krishna. He therefore mercifully spoke the supreme Purana known as Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the bright light of absolute truth and which describes the activities of Lord Krishna. Srila Prabhupada's purport. This verse was spoken by Sridhar Goswami in Srimad Bhagavatam 12.12.69. Any questions? So there was one devotee used to sell Bhagavatams on the street, and he would simply quote this verse. This beautiful Bhagavatam has arisen just like the sun after the departure of Lord Sri Krishna to his own abode, accompanied by knowledge, religion, etc. And people have lost their vision due to this dark, dense, dark age of Kali Yuga. Shall get light from this Bhagavad Prana, and it's yours for only £5. He was very enthusiastic, and who could say no? He was very good at distributing books, because that verse itself gives you the whole message of Bhagavad Prana. Brahmananda Haiti Purna Nanda Krishna Guna Ataiva Akarshayi Atma Rame Ramana. The transcendental qualities of Sri Krishna are completely blissful and relishable. Consequently, Lord Krishna's qualities attract even the minds of self-realized persons from the bliss of self-realization. And there are examples of this. We have the 4 Kumaras who already were liberated, but they were attracted to Krishna. And so there's many different examples of that. Some are listed in the Bhagavad Prana. And this is a very famous verse. Atmaramas Chamunayo Nirgranta Apyurukrame Kurvantya Hoitikim Bhaktim Itam Bhutta Guno Hari. Those who are self-satisfied and unattracted by external material desires are also attracted to the loving service of Sri Krishna, whose qualities are transcendental and whose activities are wonderful. Hari, the personality of Godhead, is called Krishna because he has such transcendentally attractive features. So that's the meaning of the name Krishna, is the all-attractive personality. So whatever we're attracted to in this world, if we give it up for Krishna's service, we're not going to find something less. We're going to find more because there's more in the source. Just like if you go down to the bank and you get £10 out, or you can do that, or else they could say, well, just open the bank and you can just take as much as you like out. Then that £10 is included already in the bank. You wouldn't say, well, I'll just keep the £10, would you? You'd be considered to be a bit insane. So whatever pleasure we experience in this world, whatever we find ourselves attracted by, then that attractiveness is coming from Krishna. He's the embodiment of all attraction. So this verse was spoken by Lord Chaitanya also to So I was thinking of some Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. So at the time of Lord Chaitanya, just over 500 years ago, then the greatest scholar, renowned scholar, it was known through all of India at that time, was Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. And the Gaura Ganata Chittapika, it mentions that he is actually Brihaspati, the spiritual master of the demigods. So he's not a small fry. But he was taking part in the Lord's pastimes. So he was the greatest scholar. Everybody revered him. And he was giving lessons to Lord Chaitanya. Of course, Lord Chaitanya, being Krishna himself, doesn't require lessons from anybody. But even as Krishna, he was showing the example. He accepted the spiritual master, Sandipani Muni, to show the example. Because whatever a great person does, then common people will follow in the footsteps. And sometimes so-called great people in Kali Yuga are doing stupid things and people are following in their footsteps. But if someone is doing something great, actually great, something beneficial, selfless, then people who've got some good qualities will recognise that and perhaps be inspired to do something similar. So he was receiving lessons from Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya for 7 days. He sat being taught philosophy by Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, and he never uttered a word. He didn't ask one question. So at the end of it, and typically Sarvabhauma was used to all the students feeling privileged to be in his class, and they're all glorifying, oh yes, Swamiji, you're great, fantastic, thank you very much for your time and all that. At the end of it, Lord Chaitanya was sitting there, he never said a thing, and he says, my dear student, you're very silent, everyone else is asking questions, and he's used to getting some praise. And he says, but you haven't said a word. He says, do you not understand what I've spoken? Do you not understand this philosophy? He says, I understand this perfectly. He says, but what you've spoken is nonsense. And he was thinking, who's this young upstart? How dare he speak to me like this? He called him Murka to me, right? Murka means you're a fool. So the disciple never calls the spiritual master a fool. That's usually a really bad etiquette. Even if he is a fool, then he would just vote with his feet. He would just go somewhere else. So he was shocked. He was like, how dare you speak to me like this? What's the meaning of this? And then he quoted this verse, Atmaramas Chamunayo, and which is, those who are self-satisfied and unaffected by external material desires are also attracted to the loving service of Sri Krishna, whose qualities are transcendental and whose activities are wonderful. Hari, the personality of Godhead, is called Krishna because he has such transcendentally attractive features. So Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya was an impersonalist, and Lord Chaitanya said that what you're teaching is not teaching, it's cheating. You're supposed to be teaching about the absolute truth, but you're actually just speaking about covered monism. And because Lord Chaitanya is Krishna, then the potency by which he spoke just left Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya dumbfounded. So he went back to his house and he was completely shaken by the whole thing, feeling like he just wasted lifetimes. And then he was just wondering about his position, feeling totally out of sorts, and Lord Chaitanya appeared to him in this form, Sadbhuj. If you go to Jagannath Puri, you can visit Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya's house, it's still there. And there's a painting on the wall of this. I think they might have made it into a diorama now, but there's a painting of Sadbhuj. So Sadbhuj means 6 arms. So Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya was thinking, who is this effulgent young student who's just completely defeated me in philosophy? And then Lord Chaitanya appeared in his room and showed him that I'm Krishna, I'm Rama, and he showed these different arms, the arms of Lord Ram with the bow and arrow, the arms of Krishna with the flute, and the arms of himself as a sannyasi. And then he understood who he was dealing with, and then he became a great devotee also. So when Lord Chaitanya was talking about saving the most fallen, he demonstrated it in different ways. We think the most fallen is just simply Jagai and Madai because they were drunkards and did so many heinous crimes, but also this philosophy of monism, which denies the personal aspect of the Supreme. That is also a type of fallen condition. So in the Srila Prabhupada mentions that Maya, or the illusory energy, captures our mind and makes us believe different illusions. And the last snare, or the last trap of Maya, is to think that we are God, and that we become one with God. So he makes this distinction. He says that we are simultaneously one with and different from God, and this is the philosophy which Lord Chaitanya taught, Achintya Beda Beda Tattva, that inconceivably, Achintya Beda Beda, that we are one with and different from Tattva, the absolute truth. So can anyone explain that philosophy in simple terms? How can we be one with and different from at the same time? Brenda?
Just like the sunshine, and the sun, they're one, but you can't get one without the other.
Yes, so the sunshine is coming from the sun.
It's actually, we can say the sun is in the room just now, there's some sunlight coming in. But we can't say the sun is in the room, otherwise we'd be all burnt to ashes. So it's the energy of the sun. So similarly, the individual living entity, the Jivatma, and we're just like we're simultaneously one with Krishna and we're one in quality, we're spiritual, conscious living entities, but we're different in quantity. We don't have the powers that Krishna has. So we're known as, so there's basically three Shaktis or three energies. They can be categorized into other multiple categories, but essentially there's three. There's the Bahiranga Shaktis, the external energies like Bahir, Bahir means the Lord Nrsimhadev is outside. So the external energy, the Antaranga Shakti, which is and Tatastha Shakti, which is Arjuna. Correct. Yeah, so we are not of the material energy, we're of a higher nature. But the Antaranga Shakti is that which never is overcome by illusion. But Tatastha Shakti, which is what we are, we can choose, we have freedom to choose between being influenced by the external energy and coming under that purview, or to be influenced by the internal energy. But somehow or another, when we're in illusion, we think that the freedom of being under the influence of the external energy is more freedom. But actually we're forced to do so many things which sometimes we don't want to do. That's not freedom. We become conditioned. But under the influence of the internal energy, or the spiritual energy, then one is really free, because one is not conditioned. One is free from conditioning. Just like water, in its pure state, it doesn't have any additives in it. Just like recently at Hopeship, who has been providing some nice drinking water for the devotees. In comparison to the tap water, it's much nicer. You can actually, if you go back to drinking the old stuff, you can really taste the chemicals, the additives. Or if you were to drink from a muddy puddle, and then if you would get offered a muddy puddle or a nice glass of clean water, which one would you go for? So just because there's more in the muddy puddle doesn't mean to say it's better. Sometimes less is more. So the spiritual soul, the spirit soul, in its lesser condition, as in free from material conditioning, is actually in a greater position. We have more freedom to choose. So we'll just read this next verse, text 141. E sabarahi Krishna charana sambandhi atmana mera mama hare tulasi gandhi. Apart from the pastimes of Lord Krishna, when tulasi leaves are offered at the lotus feet of Shri Krishna, even the aroma of the leaves attracts the minds of self-realized persons. So we'll see how it's time's gone on a bit late. I'll just do this verse myself. Tasya Ravindamaya Nasya Padaravinda Kinjalka Mishra Tulasi Makaranda Vayu Antagatashi Swa Vivarena Chakaratesham Sanchova Makshara Jusham Api Chitta Tanvo. Translation: when the breeze carrying the aroma of tulasi leaves and saffron from the lotus feet of the lotus-eyed personality of Godhead entered through the nostrils into the hearts of those sages, the Kumaras, they experienced a change in both body and mind, even though they were attached to the impersonal Brahman understanding. That's per quote. This is a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam 3.15.43. Vidura Maitreya discussed the pregnancy of Diti. Diti's pregnancy caused the demigods to be very much afraid, and the demigods went to see Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma explained the original incident involving the curse of Jaya Vijaya by the Chatushan Kumaras. Once the Chatushan Kumaras went to Vaikuntha to visit Narayan, the Supreme Person of Godhead, but they were stopped from entering the palace at the seventh gate by two doorkeepers named Jai and Vijay. Due to their jealousy, Jai and Vijay would not allow the Kumaras entry, and consequently the Kumaras became angry and cursed Jai and Vijay, condemning them to take birth in the family of Asuras in the material world. The omniscient personality of Godhead could immediately understand the incident, and he came with his eternal consort, the goddess of fortune. The Chatushan Kumaras immediately offered obeisances unto the Lord simply by seeing the Lord and smelling the aroma of tulsi and saffron from his lotus feet. The Kumaras became devotees and abandoned their long-cherished impersonalism. Thus, the four Kumaras were turned into Vaishnavas simply by smelling the aromatic tulsi mixed with saffron. Those who are actually on the platform of Brahman realization and who have not offended the lotus feet of Krishna can immediately become Vaishnavas simply by smelling the aroma of the Lord's lotus feet. But those who are offenders or demons are never attracted to the Lord's personal feature, even though they may visit the Lord's temple many times. In Vrindavan we have seen many Mayavadi sannyasis who do not even come to the temple of Govindaji, Gopinath or Madan Mohan, because they think that such temples are Maya. Therefore they are called Mayavadis. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu therefore said that the Mayavadis are the greatest offenders. Interesting, in Chaitanya Charitamrita also, Prabhupada speaks about Patangalists. So there's two types of Patangalists. There's the original Patangalists, and then there's other bogus followers. And although generally the Mayavadis are considered offenders against Krishna because they deny the form of the Lord, and they decry the transcendental form of the Lord as being something mundane. And Krishna explains this in Bhagavad Gita, Avajanantamam mutha manashim tanam ashrita, that fools deride me when I descend in my human-like form. So of course nowadays people think that man has made God in their image. It used to be said in the Bible that God has made man in his image, and then the materialists, they change it when they say that simply because we want to imagine a God, then we think because man is the top of the food chain, then God must be like a man. He must be very old as well because he's ancient, so they depict him with a long beard. But actually, on the personal aspect of God, then we see pictures of Radha and Krishna, then God is both in male and in female. And in the highest level of devotional service, even God feels subservient to Srimati Radharani, so in Vrindavan she's considered to be the topmost. So this verse, Parvati asks Shiva, what is the topmost worshipable object? And Lord Shiva answers, I can't remember the Sanskrit, anybody remember it? Tadim? Lord Shiva answers that the topmost worshipable object is Lord Vishnu, but higher than that is that which is related to Vishnu, Tadiya. So, although Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, according to the Vedic literatures, there are many different incarnations, and Krishna is said to be the fountainhead of all incarnations, the cause of all causes, and the origin of all, and still he's very happy to serve his devotees and even worship his devotees, and none are more dear to Krishna than Srimati Radharani, who he places as the topmost worshipable object. We see that in Rupa Goswami's Nectar of Instruction. So the depiction of God as a man-made thing can be there because someone's depiction of God is imaginary. But when the actual depiction of God is there, coming from the right source, then it is without fault and it is complete. So this, the bogus Patanjali's followers, not the actual proper followers. Prabhupada explains in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that they perform great austerities and to control their senses, to purify their mind, etc. And then they see Vishnu within the heart, because in Mayavadi they have the first step of realization of the absolute truth, which is impersonalism, which has one aspect. So just as the sun, you've got three aspects of that. You have the sun rays, you have the sun disk, and then you have the sun globe. So from here we can see the sun rays, or the effect of the sun. And if you look at it, we may see a disk, but then if you further study it, you see there's a globe with so much activity going on there. Maybe hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago, people might not have understood with their own naked eye what's going on in the sun, but nowadays we have some instruments which help us to view the sun's activities going on. Similarly, the different aspects of God, Brahmati, Paramatmati, Bhagavan iti Sabjati. So these three aspects of realizing absolute truth. The first one is the Brahman, understanding that the absolute truth is not void, it's not a big bang, it's not just nothing. It is actually the source of all living entities. And then people, if they can come to that through logic or through austerity and realize that, then they can realize that we are one with the absolute truth, and that is true to some degree. But they're not yet understanding the distinction between one in quality and one in quantity. So we are of that spiritual nature, of the supreme absolute truth. But then a little further, so that's just compared to the sun rays, countless little sun rays coming from the sun. But even that, they're all individual. So then the second realization of the sun would be to see the disk, or to see Vishnu within the heart. Said that and within the body is the giving life to the body is the Atma, and the aspect of Krishna, who kindly accompanies us, each and every individual living entity, in all the different bodies that they enter into, is called Paramatma. That Paramatma means supreme, so Param means supreme. I think we even find in the English and other languages the word para is used sometimes in that respect. So we have Brahman, which is impersonalization, Paramatma, which is to realize that God is within the heart and is a person, and is fulfilling all our desires without question, according to our karma, and always just waiting for us to surrender and turn back to Him. So the Patanjalists, when they finally become free from all material designations, then they see the Lord within the heart, and then they think, oh, there I am, that's me there. And then at that point, as soon as they identify Vishnu in the heart as themselves, then they become fallen, because they don't understand that this is a separate living entity, a supreme being. So they are also considered to be inauthentic worshippers. But of course, the real followers, then they understand the position of Vishnu, that we are subservient. And it's interesting because in the material world we think subservient means oppressed or suppressed, and we don't like it. Nobody wants to be subservient, everybody wants to be served, or at least we don't want to have to serve people. We always want to promote ourselves so we're serving less people. But in the spiritual world, in this competition for service, sometimes the devotees trying to serve each other and they're competing to serve each other. Or sometimes the devotees try to glorify each other and they're competing to do that. In the material world, we compete to spread our glories beyond someone else's. Even if that person's got good qualities, we'll find some bad quality to bring them down to put ourselves up. This is material consciousness. Oh yeah, this person must be very nice, but look, have you seen the cut of his jib, as they say in some places in the UK? You seen the state of his hairdo, or you see the nail polish he wears, or imagine going out in public wearing that. We will find some way to bring them down, and simply so we can put ourselves up. But actually what we do is we bring ourselves down. By criticising others, we don't bring others down, we bring ourselves down. So as devotees, we're trying to learn that practice of putting others up and seeing the good qualities in others. And even sometimes we think, the honeybee should see that only takes the nectar, and the fly that just finds a stool. And we might think, well, if you're a honeybee, you'd starve around here. So you might be thinking like that. Because there's no nectar to be found, it's only stool. But that's because we have a fly mentality. Rabinatha Maharaj was saying that in a field of flowers, a fly will find one piece of stool and it will ignore all the flowers. In a field of stool, the public toilets in India, in certain places, in the remote areas, the public toilet is very public, it's a field and everyone goes there. But there may be one flower and the bee will ignore all the stool and it will find that one flower. So sometimes it's strange, even you hear devotees glorifying someone who is by all accounts appears to be demoniac, but the devotee will still see some good thing in there. Because essentially everybody is a pure spirit soul. We may have identified temporarily to become a big demon even, but ultimately everybody is part and parcel of Krishna and everyone goes back eventually, whether it takes one birth or a million births. So this is the practice of devotional service, is to try to see the good. And even though we are full of mistakes ourselves, and we may, if we want to have a look and find so many mistakes in others, it doesn't do us any good to find the mistakes. It just actually makes us less happy. We become more unhappy by finding mistakes. You never feel satisfied by criticising people, do you? It's never, you have to criticise more and more. So, Param Drisva Nivartati, we're aspiring for a higher taste, but when we get involved in criticism, then we're getting a lower taste. There's a certain type of taste in gossip, isn't there? But it's never really satisfying, whereas even, you say, spiritually we're never satisfied, but that's never been satisfied in a good way, because it means that one is ever increasing the ocean of transcendental bliss. So, this was saying that here, even the four Kumaras, who were great sages, but they wanted to maintain their purity and innocence, so they chose to remain in the bodies of some small boys who were only 4 or 5 years old. And typically, if a child's 4 years old and he goes naked, then nobody thinks, well, get some clothes on you. If an adult goes around naked, then it's a bit of a problem. So they were so detached that they just went around always as 4 young boys, practically toddlers, and they were always naked. And they were very pure at heart, because they were not inimical towards Krishna. As soon as they came into contact with anything to do with Krishna, immediately they became attracted and became great devotees. Such to the effect that we have the Kumara Sampradaya. So there's 4 Sampradayas, 4 disciplic successions. There's the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, a succession which we're part of. There's the Rudra Sampradaya, coming from Lord Shiva. There's the Kumara Sampradaya, coming from the 4 Kumaras, and there's the Sri Sampradaya. So they are such powerful devotees that they even had their own successive line coming from them. But even though they were free from all material desire, just like, interestingly enough, there's so many times when we read Prabhupada Lilamrita and then we read Bhagavatam or Chaitanya, there's a connection there. So Prabhupada was discussing about one devotee who was known as a Vantasi sannyasi. They say that if someone renounces something and then goes back to it, then it's considered to be like eating your own vomit. Sometimes we give up something, like say we give up smoking, we know it's bad for us, and we struggle with it and give it up, and then go back to it, we feel we've let ourselves down, isn't it? So that's considered to be like eating your own vomit. You've thrown something up, you've given it away because you know it's bad. Just like when you eat something that disagrees with you, then you say the best thing to do is throw it up, get it out of the system. So if we're doing something which we know is harmful for us, we give it up, and then we go back to it again, out of attachment, then that's quite unfortunate. So sometimes we struggle with that. I think we all struggle with that all the time, because otherwise we'd be free from everything we've ever heard was not good for us. We give it up for a little bit, and we're still toying with it to some degree. But these 4 Kumaras, they weren't like that. They weren't renunciants who were still externally giving up things, but internally they were contemplating. This is also spoken about in Bhagavad Gita, that sometimes we give up something on a gross platform, but internally we're still desiring it. So that's the easy part, is actually giving up the physical part of it. The difficult part is to give up the desire, to enjoy something which is actually not good for us, or to be part of something which is going to fortify our illusion that we're this body, we're this temporary changing mind. But the 4 Kumaras, they were not on that platform. They were actually free, akinchana. They were free from all material desires. And therefore, when they heard about Krishna, they spontaneously were attracted and became devotees. So it does take a lot of hard work, even to keep our mind off of the sense objects. Then we take our mind to another sense object, which is Krishna. Because we are used to a sensual lifestyle, then we have senses. We are not without senses. Even in the spiritual world, we still have full senses. It's not that we become devoid of senses. But when we engage them in Krishna's service, Rishikesha, saving them back to Uchike. So Krishna is known as the Yogeshwar, the master of all mystic powers, and Rishikesha, the controller of all senses. So if we engage our senses in the service of Krishna, who's the master of the senses, then our senses become controlled. And Prabhupada explains that this is the senses which are uncontrolled, they're like dangerous serpents. But the senses which are engaged in Krishna's service, they become no more than a serpent with broken fangs. So you imagine a serpent which normally, sometimes you even see some very highly poisonous snakes, and they're not that big. You know, maybe a couple of feet long, they don't look very scary, but they give you a bite, you'll be dead within 2 minutes. Neurotoxic and other types of very strong toxins. But if such a snake had its teeth removed and had no way of biting you, then you wouldn't even be afraid of it. It's trying to have a go at you, and you're thinking you're just laughing at it. There was one devotee who lived in South Africa, and he was telling us one time he went into the shower room and there was a baby snake there, and he said it practically couldn't have had any fangs, but it was hissing, it was trying to have a go at him, and it was just quite laughable really. But if that snake was like another year older, then it would be deadly. So this is the situation that the senses, what does it say, that even one of the senses that we focus on can take away even a person of steady intelligence. So therefore we cannot rest on our laurels. Our laurels, as in Roman culture, if someone did something, some great achievement, they would get a laurel wreath. Right? They wouldn't get some crown of gold, they'd get a wreath made of laurels. It would be like a crown that would be put on their head, and they'd be hailed as someone who'd done something very significant for the Roman Empire. So this is what it means, resting on our laurels. We think, yes, okay, now I've done something, and the nation will just serve me. So we shouldn't be thinking, oh, I've been doing service for the last week, or the last year, or the last 10 years, or the last 40 years. You know, now it's time to put my feet up, because when we do that, the mind will start to wander onto some sense object which will distract us, and then all our good service will actually get put on hold, we'll become covered again. So we always have to keep up our guard so that we don't become yet again covered by illusion, become a victim of the senses, and rather becoming Godas, or servant of the senses, we become Goswami, master of the senses. So this is what Prabhupada was giving us, whether we are in one ashram or another, whether we're male, female, sannyasi, brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, then it's the same. Prabhupada says that this movement is a movement of Paramahamsas, swan-like devotees, which is actually beyond even any of the varnas and ashrams. So in this way, everybody has an equal opportunity to become a Paramahamsa. Paramahamsa, Hamsa means swan, and this Paramahamsa refers to, so the swan is able to, if there's a mixture of milk and water, then the swan has a way of actually being able to separate the milk and water. It can drink the milk from it and leave the water. So similarly, Paramahamsa means that even if there's a mixture of good and bad, then they only see the good. They just take the good, and they can take the good from any situation. This means that their mind is pure, free from the ability to fault find. So this is something which we can daily work on. And therefore, one of the first lessons Krishna gives is learn to tolerate. And one way to learn to tolerate is to see the good in others. So we'll just stop at that, and if anyone's got any questions or comments.
Thank you very much for a very interesting class. We were talking about persons who have Brahman realization or who have Paramatma realization. We were talking about the Patanjalists who come to the platform of Paramatma realization, well, come to the platform of perfecting like Ashtanga Yoga, but then they kind of make a false conclusion that they've found themselves rather than finding their Ishtadev.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in that sense, they could become kind of quite envious Mayavadis if they got in the wrong association. They could, because they're very powerful, because they practiced yoga and control the senses, they can obviously become very powerful people. And you would, even if you saw that and recognized that, and you may be able to protect yourself from them because you understand what's led them to that, but you would feel that you would want to protect like younger, less experienced people from that person. So and that's, if you look at Lord Chaitanya's pastimes, that's what he was doing. He was like protecting his younger devotees from impersonalists and Mayavadis. Although Srila Prabhupada says in that relationship that because Tapan Mishra and Chandrasekhara weren't capable of because they were Kanishka devotees, then they couldn't give the right arguments to defeat Prakashananda. So Lord Chaitanya kind of stepped in and protected them by defeating Prakashananda. So, but now because in the society we live in now, that kind of strong argument and defeating someone, and because Prakashananda accepted defeat and then all of his disciples became devotees, but we see that doesn't happen now. So you can't just kind of, even if you're trying to protect your community of devotees from some powerful Mayavadi, if that powerful Mayavadi turns out to be like a politician or somebody like a big public figure, so how do you protect your community of devotees from impersonalism when impersonalism has become glorified throughout the institutions of the world? And if you do criticize impersonalists, you're just seen as being really stupid, sort of prejudiced people.
Yeah, well, it's a very good question and many good points there. I remember when I was in the Bhakti program, one devotee, Prabhupada disciple Hiranandan, says that back in the Vedic times, if one scholar defeated another scholar, then that one who was defeated would accept the defeat and then follow that higher conclusion. And even if that one who established a higher conclusion was defeated by another one, then he would accept that one and all their followers would follow that one. So their intention was to find the absolute truth and follow that which was the higher teaching. But because people's intention is not that, their intention is to cheat. And therefore, even if you teach them something higher, they don't want to know. But at the same time, it's our duty. Typically, if someone's going to do something which is going to harm them, or someone's going to do something to harm someone else, it's your duty to point that out. So we have to think how to do that in such a way that it doesn't just appear that we're fanatical or envious of them or their success or whatever. So we have to do it through simple logic. And so sometimes you can use the yes but argument. So yes, that's very good, but have you considered this? And then you show the limitations of it and you show the impracticalities of it. Just like, I'll give an example, Laura's mum, Karina, she teaches, she's a yoga teacher trainer, and once a year normally she invites us to do a Bhagavad Gita introduction talk. And because they're accustomed to reading the Bhagavad Gita, which has got impersonalistic conclusions, then so Karina asks them to make up some questions, to think of some questions when they're reading the book to see how they can understand it better. But I found, so each time I go to do that class, even though they're reading a certain book, I say, well, I can only speak from Bhagavad Gita as it is because that's the tradition which I follow. And I find that most of their questions are based on confusion as to the practical application of it. And that's the thing, which is where we win, is the Mayavadi philosophy is not practical, whereas Krishna consciousness is very practical. And each time we answer according to Prabhupada's Gita, we go, oh, that makes sense. Because they're wondering, how can you be a yogi in everyday life? You've got to give up family, you've got to give up this, you've got to give up that. And because it's not actually the proper message, so many people, they will use the fame of Bhagavad Gita to promote themselves by doing their own translation of it. But they don't actually follow teachings of it. They don't speak the proper teaching. That's why Prabhupada, when he translated Bhagavad Gita, it says, as it is, not as I think it should be, or as I happen to bend it to my own philosophy. But what they want to do is they want to use the fame of Bhagavad Gita to promote themselves, rather than just writing their own book. If they just write their own book, who would read it? Yeah, so we find that when we actually accept that the absolute truth as a person, understands that we're a person, understands our predicament, and gives us a practical way to extricate ourselves out of the material world while still living within it. And sometimes we hear this statement, in the world but not of the world, and quite often this is used in a kind of pseudo-spiritualistic, mystical way. And sometimes people are attached to mysticism in the sense like they don't really want to know, they just want to remain mystified, as if that's something really cool. But the reality of it is, there is an answer to everything, and it's fairly simple, simply that if we engage in the loving devotional service of Krishna, even in this material world, we can continue apparently as normal, doing many of the things. Some things we would have to give up, like we can't maintain slaughterhouses in Krishna service, stuff like that. You could be a junkie in Krishna service, but it's not going to be offerable to Krishna. You can't offer your heroin on the altar or something like that, or LSD. And sometimes people try these silly things, but it's not acceptable in Krishna's book. So he says, just offer Patram Pushpam Palam Toyam. You can offer me leaf, fruit, flower, water. These are simple things. Anyone can offer these things. He makes it available for everyone. And offer according to your capacity. So if we have a small capacity, we offer what we can. If we have a big capacity, we offer what we can. And he makes it very easily, makes himself very easily approachable. And we can begin to experience it through chanting as well. When we chant kirtan, it's not just like going to a football match and chanting Celtic or Rangers or Sunderland or Newcastle or whatever, or whatever our team happens to be. People can get caught up in the euphoria of that, but it's not the same as kirtan when you actually feel blissful. and you feel your mind being controlled, and sometimes you feel all your troubles going away. So it's a practical application is where it comes in, and there was one devotee was fundraising in, I think it was Nottingham, and this guy came along, he started spouting his impersonalist philosophy. So the devotee put it to the test. He says, "Oh, so you think it's all one? You know, I am you and you are me and we're all one?" "Yeah, that's right, it's okay then. Give me my wallet." And of course, when it came to the practical application, then he wasn't so. Well, first of all, the devotee kind of laid the trap for him. He got him to really commit to being the impersonalist, and then he actually was like, give him the wallet very, very reluctantly. And he says, "Okay, thanks very much," and then he just let him go. And then the guy came back and says, "Okay, there's some money from bus fare." He says, "We're all one, just ask the bus driver to let you on for free, he'll pay for it." So he was demonstrating actually it's not a practical thing. You know, we can talk high philosophy, but when it comes down to it, there's nothing we can do to practice it very well. And if you want to really practice impersonalism, then you have to find a secluded place, cut all association off. So those who are posing as being spiritualists and impersonalists, then they're simply opposed, or simply they haven't found a higher conclusion yet. Just like the four Kumaras, they were sincerely seeking, and then they found a higher conclusion and they immediately followed that higher conclusion. But some people also pose as being a searcher. Even if they find something, they don't want to really find it, they want to just keep searching because then they have to commit to something. So this is the thing, if we're looking, if we can find it, we're going to commit to it. So okay, I hope that answers your question. Okay, I'll just stop there. Is there anything online? Let's go and give him the key.
Jai.
Jai.
हरि बोल। श्री प्रभुपाद प्राण प्रभु की जय।